Hello, Packers fans, wherever you may be. It's time for another edition of the Pack Attack Cast. It's been a little slow for the last month and a half while we watch the NFL slowly transition from 2025 to 2026, but we are here. Free agency starts on Wednesday, and teams, including the Green Bay Packers, are already making moves to prepare for free agency. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about news and notes around the NFC North to prep you for your free agency watching on Wednesday. It's going to be exciting to watch not only what the Packers do in free agency or don't do, we'll have to see what happens there, but also what the Bears, Lions, and Vikings do in free agency, because it's going to have a big impact on who wins the NFC North for 2026. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you kind of a news dump. We're going to go through the news as of today that can impact free agency. We're going to take a look at the salary cap for all the teams in the NFC North. And we're going to look at what each team is doing to prepare for free agency. So that's the big news item of the day. But I really want to take a few minutes to talk about Bob Harlan. Bob Harlan, former president and CEO of the Green Bay Packers, passed away at 89 yesterday. Our thoughts are with the family, and it is not hyperbole to say the Green Bay Packers would not be in Green Bay if it was not for Bob Harlan. Bob Harlan was instrumental in setting up the Packers for success on the field and off the field in ways that modern Packer fans really can't appreciate, because Bob Harlan set the foundation, excuse me, that future CEO and presidents of the Green Bay Packers have built upon. He is the bedrock of the modern Green Bay Packers. And it's really important that as fans, we take a moment to recognize what Bob Harlan did for the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to defer to Ed Policy, current president and CEO of the Green Bay Packers, and read his statement about Bob Harlan, because I think he really encapsulates everything that Bob Harlan is for the Green Bay Packers. So let's go through what Ed Policy said today. Bob was a visionary leader whose impact on this franchise was transformational. Focus on that word, transformational, 100%. From his inspired hiring of Ron Wolf to turning around the club's on-field fortunes to his tireless work to redevelop Lambeau Field, Bob restored the Packers to competitive excellence during his tenure and helped ensure our unique and treasured flagship NFL franchise was on a sound footing for sustained generational success. We send our deepest condolences to his wife, Madeline, and the entire Harlan family. And that really encompasses what Bob Harlan did. The Green Bay Packers would not be in Green Bay if it was not for Bob Harlan. They would not have had the success in the 90s and 2000s that they had if it was not for Bob Harlan. You might be watching the Milwaukee Packers, or you might be watching the San Antonio Packers, for all we know. The Packers as an organization exist today because of Bob Harlan, and I just want to take a moment to recognize that. And the fact that we would not be enjoying the Green Bay Packers the way we are if it is not for Bob Harlan. So really appreciate everything that he has done. Our thoughts and prayers from this podcast are out to the family, and we really hope that they can embrace his legacy and the fond memories of Bob and not be focused on their sadness. Obviously, they're going to be sad. They lost a key member of their family. But Bob Harlan was a great person. Everything I've heard about Bob Harlan tells you he was a very down to earth, very friendly, very personable person who was a friend to everyone that he met. And we really should recognize the person as well as what he did as a key cornerstone for this franchise. I would not be surprised if the Green Bay Packers do something in the next year or two to recognize Bob Harlan more formally, possibly around the stadium, possibly in Titletown. I would love to see some sort of a statue for Bob Harlan. I think he definitely deserves it. So, let's switch gears now and let's talk about the NFC North going into free agency. Biggest thing we have to focus right now on is the salary cap. So let's take a look at the salary cap for the NFC North. The Bears currently have $8.1 million in salary cap. They have the most salary cap, but I would argue they've got some serious problems that they've got to spend that salary cap on, which makes that 8.1 feel very insufficient for some of the holes that they have to fill. And we're going to go through each team and talk about things that they need to do in free agency, and we'll address that when we talk about the Bears. Next up, we have the Green Bay Packers, $4.3 million available in free agency right now. So we definitely want to see that grow. And there's a couple things that the Packers can do between now and Wednesday to increase what they have available for free agency. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. The Detroit Lions are currently $6.3 million over the salary cap. They can easily address that when they need to, so don't worry about that, Lions fans. It's all funny money in the NFL. You can always find a way to get under the salary cap. In some ways it's painful, some ways it's not. But the Lions are actually in pretty good shape at minus 6.5, and that will be addressed well before Wednesday, I am sure. Now let's go on to the Minnesota Vikings, who are currently, and this is not a typo, $46.6 million over the salary cap right now. So the Minnesota Vikings have to make some significant changes to their roster to get under the salary cap, let alone be active in free agency. Now, there is one player that I do expect that they will add in free agency that will help them a little bit, but $46.6 million is a really big hole for the Vikings. As we know, they really threw everything into 2025 with the hope that they could make a big run with their young quarterback that was on a rookie contract. That did not come to fruition. The GM for the Vikings has since been fired because of this big hole that the Vikings are now staring at with little to show for it. So we're going to talk about how each of these teams need to adjust going into free agency, which starts on Wednesday. So let's start, of course, with the Green Bay Packers. Things that the Packers need to do before free agency. They probably need to address the possible cutting of Elgton Jenkins and Rashawn Gary. I think Elgton Jenkins is gone. I think there's probably a 95% chance Elgton Jenkins will be cut before Wednesday. Rashawn Gary is a question mark. We've had Brian Gutekunst say that he expects Rashawn Gary to be with this team, but those of us that are Packers fans know Rashawn Gary is not playing up to his $28 million contract, and something has to give here. Now, personally, if I was the Green Bay Packers, I would go to Rashawn Gary and say, look, we will give you a 2-year $25 million new contract. So that's about 12 and a half per year, which I think is far closer to what Rashawn Gary's worth is versus the 28 million he currently has now. So I would go to Rashawn Gary and say 2 years, 25 million, it's on the table, or we're going to cut you. And see if Rashawn Gary wants to take that restructure. Now, it's very likely that $12.5 million is actually more than Rashawn Gary would get in free agency. And it would save the Packers some money over the long term. And we would still have Rashawn Gary, who is really good against the run, even if he is no longer able to effectively rush the passer. He could still be a good running downs end for the Green Bay Packers. So there's still value for Rashawn Gary, no question about it, but not at $28 million. So if I was the Green Bay Packers, if I was Brian Gutekunst, I would call up Rashawn Gary's agent and say $2 million, 25, it's on the table until Monday, or we're going to probably cut your client, and see what Rashawn Gary wants to do about that. This is also the window that is still remaining if the Packers want to re-sign any potential free agents. Do they want to give Sean Ryan a last-minute deal before free agency? That's something that's possible. And we'll have to see what happens, because the Packers need to come up with a solution at center, probably in free agency, whether it's re-signing Sean Ryan or looking at some other free agents at center. They need to have a solution before the draft, because the truth of the matter is, well, there are some centers in the draft that could possibly come in and start for you. That's not the ideal solution for a team that wants to win a Super Bowl this year. So I would love to see the Packers draft a center of the future, but have a starting center already lined up, and it's not currently on the roster, unless you want to count Sean Ryan, who's only on the roster for a few more days. So the Packers have to figure out their center position. They have to figure out what to do with Elton Jenkins and Rashawn Gary. And they have to figure out how they want to manage their compensation picks as part of free agency. They could get up to 4 comp picks in 2027 if they don't sign more than 2 or 3 free agents. So it's not just adding players. You want to add players and still keep those compensation picks for the future. Now, one of the things you can do is you can go after players that are free agents right now or already released, because they don't count against the comp pick calculation. So, for example, there's been a couple centers that have been released. If you wanted to sign one of those, you could sign one of those today, and they would not count against the comp picks. So, those are all important factors for the Packers to figure out between now and Wednesday. One of the biggest things the Packers did, and this happened yesterday, was the Packers restructured Xavier McKinney to open salary cap for 2026. They basically took a lot of his salary and a lot of his signing bonus, converted it into immediate signing bonus, and added some void years to his contract to create the ability to actually get under the salary cap for 2026 without having to cut any additional players. So Xavier McKinney got a nice little bonus. The Packers moved some of his cost down the road. They kicked the can down the road to create money for free agency this year. This also makes it more likely that Xavier McKinney will probably get a second contract with the Packers probably as early as next year, because they need to clean up the can that they kicked down the road. So don't be surprised if Xavier McKinney gets a new contract this time next year to try to address the kicking the can down the road, because they do have to address that at some point. Now let's take a look at the rest of the NFC North, because there's some trouble brewing in the NFC North for a lot of the teams. Now, as Packers fans, it's easy for us to look at our roster, look at our struggles at the end of 2025, and be really concerned about going into 2026. But I can tell you, the Lions, the Bears, and the Vikings all have much bigger problems to address in free agency and the offseason than the Green Bay Packers. There are some big holes that some of these players, some of these teams need to address. So let's start out with the Detroit Lions. First of all, the Lions to start getting under the salary cap, release center Graham Glasnow as part of their offensive line rebuild. So that's a big hole that the Detroit Lions now have to fill on their offensive line, either through free agency or the draft. Graham Glasnow had his struggles. There's no question about it, but he was a veteran starting interior offensive lineman, and the Lions are again going to be looking at ways that they can fill those holes on their offensive linemen. So that's something they're really going to have to work hard on for the Detroit Lions. I continue to feel like the Detroit Lions had their Super Bowl window close. Now, I do feel that the Detroit Lions, if I had to pick a team that was the biggest threat for the Packers, it is 100% the Detroit Lions and not the Bears. And we're going to talk about why the Bears may have hit a peak and are now going into a valley while they continue to rebuild their team. But I think the Detroit Lions are still the team to beat in the NFC North. And that they are the team that I will be watching the closest in free agency. Now, the Lions did agree to trade David Montgomery to the Texans. The Lions will receive a 4th-round pick, offensive lineman Juice Scruggs, which will probably be the replacement for Glasgow, and a 7th-round pick in exchange for Montgomery. Now, that might seem like it was a great haul for Montgomery, who's an older player, but now the Detroit Lions really used Montgomery as their running back 1B, right? And he really was very effective as being the hammer in the Lions offense. He was a steady running back who still had explosion, but his bread and butter was getting yards in between the tackles. And now the Lions are going to have to find a way to replace that portion of their offense with the trade of David Montgomery. I don't really see anybody on the roster that can take that spot right now. So look for the Lions to look at running backs in this draft this year. But I really think that losing Montgomery is a big problem for the Detroit Lions long term, because their depth at running back is now very, very thin. If they have a significant injury at the starting running back position, they're going to have a very hard time replacing him now that Montgomery is out. So, I understand why the Lions did it. They have to free cap space. They have to get assets for the future. But David Montgomery was a very underrated part of what the Detroit Lions do. And I think this is a net negative for the Detroit Lions so far this offseason. They've lost Glasgow, and now they've lost David Montgomery, and they have to find ways to replace those holes with very little cap space. So it'll be interesting to see how the Detroit Lions maneuver to address those issues. Now let's take a look at the Bears. So the Bears have not had a great offseason so far. The biggest issue is Drew Dahlman, who they signed last year to be their starting center, has retired at the age of 27, which is almost unheard of in the NFL. He was arguably a top 4 center in the NFL. He's retiring at the age of 27. And while the Bears will recoup some of his salary cap because he did retire, I'm sure they would much rather have Drew Dalman in the lineup because it's going to be very hard to replace him with the cap savings that his departure gives them. So the Bears are really going to have to rebuild their offensive line even more, I would argue, than the Green Bay Packers this offseason. So it's going to be interesting to see. The NFC North is going to be all competing for offensive linemen in free agency. So it'll be interesting to see who wins those fights. Also, yesterday, the Bears traded DJ Moore to the Bills. They will acquire a second-round pick while they give up a fifth-round pick back to the Bills. So the net there is about a third-round pick for DJ Moore. I would say that's fair compensation for DJ Moore, but the Bears are going to lose a very reliable wide receiver that is going to impact their offensive growth. So can they replace DJ Moore with a third-round pick in the draft? I think that's kind of dubious. So I'm not sure if it was a great move for the Bears. At best, it was a neutral move, and they're going to have to find a player to replace DJ Moore in their passing offense. So watch that very closely in free agency. And finally, let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings. We talked about the fact that they're $46 million in the hole, and they're going to have to do a lot of things between now and Wednesday. They have got to get their salary cap under control. So let's talk about a couple things for the Minnesota Vikings going into free agency. The Minnesota Vikings have been heavily linked to Kyler Murray, which makes a lot of sense. Kyler Murray was released by the Cardinals and is still going to be paid $38 million by the Cardinals not to play for them. So that means Kyler Murray will probably sign a NFL minimum contract to play for whichever team he plays for. So if the Vikings add Kyler Murray for only $1.3 million, the Cardinals are going to pay the rest of his salary for 2026. And I think the Minnesota Vikings will have a significant improvement to their wide receiver core. Now, Kyler Murray, you have to take him with a grain of salt. He's below average height, which I think is a significant disadvantage, but he is a mobile quarterback. He does have a good arm, and I have to wonder what Kyler Murray could do with Justin Jefferson. I think that's a significant improvement for Kyler Murray, and it just makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to pencil in Kyler Murray as being one of the quarterbacks that signs early in free agency to be a starter for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Minnesota Vikings are going to say he's there to compete for the job, but I'm pretty sure Kyler Murray will be your starter for the Vikings if he goes that route. But the Vikings have so much to do right now. They're trying to trade away Jonathan Greenard, not because they want to get rid of him, but because they have to get rid of him due to the salary cap. They are going to release Jonathan Allen. They're going to release Aaron Jones and Javon Hargrave. These are all quality players that the Vikings are going to be shedding. So I do fully expect that the Vikings are going to be shedding players far more than they're adding players this year, just because of the salary cap issues. And there's not that much they could do about it other than cutting players. So look for the Minnesota Vikings. While they're going to add a Kyler Murray, which I think will make their passing offense improve, I think the rest of the team, especially the defense, is really going to regress for the Vikings because they quite frankly have to make a lot of salary cap issues go away before the start of the league year. So NFL teams can do a lot to paper over salary cap issues, but $46 million over the cap is still $46 million over the cap. So I expect the Vikings to be in full rebuild mode. They're going to be shedding a lot of veteran players with high contracts before free agency, and they're going to be looking for cheaper players to fill up their roster while they try to get their salary cap under control. So my guess would be the Minnesota Vikings are going to be the fourth best team in the NFC North this year because of their salary cap issues. Kyler Murray is probably 90% sure going to be a Minnesota Viking. It just makes all the sense in the world, but they're still going to be a rebuilding team for 2026. So there is an overview as of today of what you need to know for the NFC North going into free agency. Now, with free agency starting Wednesday, we are kicking our coverage for the Packers into full-time mode starting today. We're going to try to do a video every day or every other day from now until hopefully the Green Bay Packers lift up the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the Super Bowl. We're going to try to do that as much as possible. I do have some travel, including I will be spending a full 2 weeks in Green Bay covering the Packers during training camp. But we're going to do our level best to try to do as many videos as possible, either every day or every other day from now until the end of the season. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button, hit it now because you're going to miss out on a lot of content if you don't hit that subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow what we're going to do is we're going to probably do our last post-combine pre-free agency mock draft. So we're going to do that tomorrow. We're going to do a mock draft factoring in the combine results and before free agency and see how that's going to shape out for the Green Bay Packers. So we'll see you for that tomorrow. As always, go Pack Go, and we'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Pack Attack Cast. See you then.